Good morning. It is August 30th, and we've gone through some pretty extreme conditions here in Ohio for our turf this week. Certain parts of the state have had rainfall, certain parts of the state have had none. All of the state has seen some pretty extreme high temperatures. I think the forecast has a cool down in the forecast. But for those of us who've seen recovery in the northern part of the state on some of the lawns, there is still being quite a lot of activity or a lack of activity recovery wise further south. Online this morning, we have Dr. Shetlar Carr, Dr. Dave Gardner, Dr. Dave Shetlar, Dr. Drs Wu, and the inimitable Pam Sherratt, who's still recovering from last week's drubbing by Tottenham in the Premier League. Dr. Gardner, a weed update, please.
All right. Good morning, everybody. So, yes, as Ed mentioned, it's a little dry, depending on where you are in the state. And I believe that our illustrious Dr. Carr is going to shed more light on where exactly the problem here is coming up. But generally, this is what a lot of cool season grass looks like in the state right now, right? And the thing about that is that depending on how that manifests, sometimes you can confuse that. If you look at this right here, this is where we accidentally left the irrigation off over a couple of days, and we were mowing this at 1.25 inches, which is lower than we would typically recommend for a residential lawn. But you see how that looks like a disease or insect damage. If the grass dries down and then you water it just in time that the leaf doesn't completely senesce, you will still see damage on those excessively dry leaves that can occasionally be confused for things like insect pressure or disease pressure. So remember, if you're trying to keep your grass relatively green and not going dormant, that there are some cues that it will give you, like if the grass doesn't spring back up after you pass over it either on foot or with the lawnmower, like I'm showing here. That's because as the grass plant dries down, there's these cells, large cells that in the leaf that basically hydrate, and that's what expands the leaf. Bulliform cells are what those are called. And so when it gets drier, those contract, and that's what causes the leaf blade to curl up, which one causes that weird color change from the lush green that you're used to more of that weird gray bluish green. So there's the color change, but then also the grass doesn't spring back up when you traffic it. So there's a couple of cues that the grass will give you that it's time for it to be watered if that's your goal. The challenge here is that most of the soils that we have our turf on are on as a result of construction. That fill tends to have an infiltration capacity that's much lower than what our sprinklers normally provide. So you put out your sprinkler, you water for an hour, you have a rain gauge there, and it says that you put down 1 inch, but most of our soils can only take up about 1/10 of an inch per hour, which means that the rest of that is either sitting there getting ready to evaporate, or it's running off to that crack between the edge of the lawn and the sidewalk. So the challenge is to try to irrigate at such a rate that the soil will actually take the water up. But hopefully, given the weather forecast and the fact that it's just going to start getting cooler here next week, this will become a little bit less of an issue. In the meantime, those of you that are trying to control weeds, just remember that most of our herbicides, while they're deadly to the weeds that you're trying to control, are not particularly friendly to our turf grasses either, and especially if they're stressed. And so applying in excessively dry weather will increase the chance of injury to the turf grass, and that varies depending on a variety of factors: the product that you're using and the rate, the soil moisture content at the time of application, what the weather's like at and after application, what your species and cultivar is. But as a general rule, if you have dry turf that looks like any of the images that I just showed, a herbicide application on top of that is not generally a great idea. So the question comes up, is a non-selective herbicide effective if applied to dormant grass? Let's say that you're trying to get rid of rough bluegrass, for example. This is not a good time of year to try to do that if the rough bluegrass is dormant. The same goes if you're trying to, really any grass that's dormant, if you're trying to replace that through a renovation operation this fall. If the first step was to apply a non-selective herbicide, that grass has to be green and preferably actively growing for that non-selective herbicide to actually be effective. So again, the short answer there is no. Another question at this time of the year, if you are spraying, let's say crabgrass, goosegrass, and etc., after a post-emergence herbicide application, can I expect the seed heads to not be viable after the plant has died? And unfortunately, no. You'll get rid of the plant for this year, but mark out where those plants were and plan for the seed that had been set to be perfectly viable and active for next year. So a pre-emergence herbicide would be an appropriate thing to follow up with in the spring. Sedges are less of a problem this year because it's so dry. These tend to like wetter weather than what we're seeing, but on irrigated turf, these are going gangbusters just because it's been very hot, and sedges also like hot weather. So a reminder that we have a variety of different sedge products that are available. So Sedge Hammer and Dismiss, sulfentrazone and halosulfuron are a couple of the more commonly used. But amazosulfuron and pyrimisulfan are more recent introductions, and particularly the liquid formulation of pyrimisulfan, which is newly marketed as Archon herbicide, is perhaps something that you could consider. And that's what I have for today.
Dr. Gardner, thank you so much for all the optimism. Pam Sherratt, can you follow that up?
Hello, everyone. Well, probably not. No, who can follow the wonderful Dr. Gardner? All right. All right. Can everybody see my screen there? I just wanted to show a couple of photographs that I've seen around campus this week in relation really to what Dr. Gardner was saying about the drought that we have right now. And even though the forecast is calling for cooler weather, I'm not overly impressed with the long range forecast that I've seen from precipitation, but we'll see what Dr. Carr has to say about that. But anyway, so now is a good time to check your irrigation. So I was out on campus with my students, and I love to show my students different scenarios and see if they can come up with, diagnosing an issue. And this particular issue is irrigation distribution uniformity. And so you can see that there's areas of the fields that are getting water, and there's areas of the fields where the irrigation heads aren't reaching, or those irrigation heads are broken. And so now is a really good time to be able to diagnose that. And sometimes when you're walking on the field, it's difficult to do that. And sometimes if you go up in the bleachers, it's much easier to see those patterns and get a really good feel for what's happening with that distribution uniformity. So that's a picture I wanted to show. And then over at Chadwick, they've been doing a lot of work over at the Learning Gardens. They've completely renovated the Stephen Still garden, which is worth a visit. It's looking beautiful right now. And they had a large area that needed to be seeded. And so they've, as you can see, they've hydro-mulched it. They've gone in there and they've put out seed with some kind of mulch, which probably contains fertilizer. It'll contain some kind of paper pulp or product that will retain moisture, keep that seed in place and prevent it from washing out during a heavy rainfall. And so if we do get rain, and if you are planning on seeding, obviously covering that seed with some kind of moisture retention cover is imperative. I will also add, because I'm going to be doing a lot of renovation at my personal property, and I've seen this on a lot of fields that when I've been out and about, my kids are back playing sports, and I see a lot of these, certainly rec fields and high school fields. There is a lot of organic material on the surface. So we've got a lot of dead weeds, we've got a lot of dead grasses, we've got a lot of debris and organic material, biomass, whatever you call it, on the surface that needs to be removed before you seed. So scarification, raking, whatever you can do to remove that dead material prior to doing any seed renovation, I think is going to be a big deal this year. I am personally going to hold off on any kind of renovations just for a week or two, because following up from what Dr. Gardner said, I'm going to be seeding an area from scratch, and I need to kill the existing vegetation with a non-selective herbicide. And there's no point in doing that right now because the grasses are dormant. So I'm going to wait a couple of weeks, see what happens. If they wake up, I can put that application out, and then I can seed from there. So I'm going to maybe do a step-by-step this fall. If it goes well, I'm going to be seeding a turf/dwarf wildflower mix. It's fine fescue with dwarf pollinator plants in the devil strip outside my house, which is right now completely brown and hard as concrete. So we'll see. We'll do a step by step and we'll see what happens, but I'm going to have to hold off because I do need to use a non-selective herbicide first. So, and then very lastly, on the 12th of September, the Ohio SFMA are hosting a fall field day at the Scott's Company in Marysville. This is the first time that this group has done this. I'm super excited about this. There'll be education put on, but there will also be a tour of the Scott's facilities, and we'll learn, you know, about some of their R&D, you know, just, you know, how a fertilizer is made and what kind of things have Scott's been doing. And they've got a fascinating history of how they've been part of the turfgrass industry right from the very beginning of technologies and fertilizer technologies. So really excited for that conference. I'll be speaking at that conference, and I'm really excited to see some of you there if you can make it on the 12th of September. Register at the Ohio Turfgrass Foundation website. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. And no comment on your Everton Football Club? No, nothing to.
Those of you that are used to following a team that's, you know, can't continuously let you down, I will say that a new low was conceding 7 goals into the first 2 games of the season. So I'll leave it at there. Sometimes it's nice to follow the underdog. So, but for my blood pressure, it would be nice to not spend a 3rd season worrying about relegation, but we'll see. Ever the optimist, Ed, ever the optimist.
As many of my students will know, maybe you're alluding to Browns fans. Dr. Carr.
First thing that I thought of was being an Arkansas Razorback football fan, even though they beat an FCS school 70-0 yesterday. But we're not, that's an FCS school. We play Oklahoma State next week. It could be rough. Pam, I walked by some of those areas that have been hydroseeded in the last 2 weeks. I saw 2 seedlings emerging. That's all I saw. I made a little trek, saw 2 seedlings, and they were right beside each other, kind of in the shade. And then there's that sod that they laid on Woody Hayes, right up against Woody Hayes. It was getting pretty droughty, and then I was driving into work. Most of Woody Hayes Drive was not underwater. There was water on the road. They piped into that fire hydrant and they were blasting it. So they're getting water to it, which is good. Because there's a lot of seed that's been put out around here.
So is the moral of the story, even if you hydroseed, you still need to water?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's fair. So if you take anything away from today's Turf Team Times, seed needs water. So that's I think you'll take more away from it than that today. So, all right, back to death and destruction, which I typically point out in these Turf Team Times. This is our drought monitor. Now, do want to point out this piece in the bottom left corner. They put these out every week, and it's valid on every Tuesday. So the 27th, 27th was a Tuesday. They released these on Wednesday. In the middle of this week, almost 40% of our state was under some type of drought. And we're seeing extreme and exceptional drought in this state, in the southeastern part of the state, like we really haven't seen in a number of years. I was looking at some historical data. We haven't seen this level of extreme and exceptional drought since the mid to late 2000s. We had some dry periods in like 2017, but that was more in the abnormal to severe range. We're starting to see exceptional drought in far southeastern part of the state where you have this maroon color. I received a couple photos from the turfgrass manager at Ohio University. These are some areas, and this is an area that's in that fringe of being under exceptional drought. These are unirrigated. This is a driving range. You can see the picking balls up over here. And then this is a intramural athletic field that does not receive irrigation, which I thought looked pretty decent considering it receives no irrigation. But you look at that hillside over there and it's just completely dormant. Now, they did receive This is over 72 hours, so this is about Tuesday on. Southern part of the state did receive some rain, so there may be some improvements in that drought monitor. And then we noticed that there was some drought showing up in that Toledo area. That was new for this week. And talking to some folks up there, they've received some rain. I think they had some storms. Someone had a tree down in their yard that I know. But there's a little bit of rain that's forecasted to come over the next week. Now you look at the eastern part of the state, they're probably going to be a little wetter, half-inch or above, which will provide a little relief. And even the southern part of the state, getting some rain, provide some relief, especially with these cooler temperatures we're going to be getting. It's going to be really nice next week after we get some rain and these reductions in temperature. Western part of the state, I mean, it's probably going to be kind of hit or miss, I would assume. I mean, I took a meteorology class in college, so I'm no expert, but I can read a map that the experts put out. You can find all these at drought.gov, and they put out pretty good information on here. And then looking ahead 8 to 14 days, this is just precip. The gray range that we have here is normal. So we're expecting kind of normal precipitation. And then most of the western half of the state, or if you just kind of drew a southwest to northeast line, that left part of the state is going to receive, or predicted to receive, below normal irrigation. So what does this mean for turf management? We've talked about establishment. Dr. Gardner mentioned that we don't need to be applying our non-selective herbicides unless you have irrigation. There are people that are going to be putting out seed regardless. And if you put seed out now, seed to soil contact is so important. And this was brought up last week too. If you're seeding into an area that you're not reestablishing, like you're just trying to overseed, using something like a slit seeder, you can rent these from all kinds of different places. Using a slit seeder that's going to kind of drill that seed down into the turf, where you have some organic matter that can help retain some moisture. If you seed it and it doesn't rain, the seed's not really going to do anything. And if it's seeded into slits, it's the chances of it moving are less. But you would want to scalp your lawn down, scalp your turf down, so you have a really good chance of that seed getting into the soil. Now, with it being dry, it's probably not going to get down as deep as you'd like. Something I'm also thinking about is if we do decide to have a glyphosate application, and we're going to be drier, maybe we go through a period where temperatures are up. I don't know. There's no telling this year. If we have a slit seeder, I'm not against leaving some of that organic material there. Now, if you want to seed to bare ground, get rid of that material. But if you can use a slit seeder, some of that organic material may help you retain some moisture. But it just depends on what you're trying to do. If you want to modify that top layer of the soil, you need to get rid of that turf. But if you just want to regrass, you could get away with leaving some of that material. Not to try to contradict what Pam's saying, I'm trying to supplement, I guess. So that's what I have. I hope we get some rain. I hope things I hope we have some relief so everybody can get back to doing what they're doing, because I know a lot of people are going to be slinging seed pretty soon. And we all want those to be successful.
Thank you, Dr. Carr. Yeah, I think the prediction is to be above normal temperatures for the next 2 months. Now, what that means as far as how far above normal, I don't know, but I did see another NOAA map talking about that prediction, and so there may be positives and negatives to that too, right? It may give us an extended window to seed in if rain does return, but what happens after we get past that 2-month period then is also another question. Dr. Wu, do you anything positive to add?
Good morning, everyone. I would like to talk about weevils today. First thing, annual bluegrass weevil. Earlier this week, I went to visit 2 golf courses in Dayton and Cincinnati area. And so one side was pretty dry, and you can see the damage shown in this picture. And when you actually knee down to look at the ground, and you can actually see the weevils, they are moving. So so you can see the weevils actually are moving, and so they're pretty active on the surface. So then we took the samples back and look at the samples further, and it turned out that there are more pupae and old larval stage emerging, and also new adults. So it looks like these are very likely to be the 3rd generation annual bluegrass weevil, and which are emerging, well, already adult stage or are emerging to adult soon in the next week or so. And so this symptom, what we saw, is also association with the drought, just continuing the previous talks. So it's like that the drought might have severe the damage, as usually the healthy turf can tolerate more damage, and when it's drought, the grass under stress, and so the damage will be more severe. And on the other side, the other golf course I visited, I did not see ABW, and it was wet. We did not see any ABW stages, no adults or larvae. It's probably the problem was being controlled, and the grass has been recovering from the damage because it received adequate irrigation. But meanwhile, it was kind of wet, and so there was some disease occurring. There was when we look at the samples under the microscope, we found there were leaf spot caused the melting out in algae, and also a bit brown patch as well. So another thing I have received this week is the billbug. There was a report saying that there was a lawn care company in the West Ohio has been mentioned about they have more billbug damage in the customers they have served than usual, and about 10% of the properties has found billbug damage. So usually the situation is that billbug, when the first generation occurs, usually the damage, the damage is caused in June by the first generation larvae. But at that time, it can be easily ignored when the situation, when we have enough irrigation or rainfalls, and the grass actually grow, and they especially like Kentucky bluegrass, susceptible species to billbugs, they can produce grow thinners, and that can quickly recover from the damage, and so the damage can be masked. So you may not even notice there's a billbugs there. When the situation is like what we have this year, is when it's dry, and then the grass under stress, and there's a lower tolerance damage to damage, and then so sometimes this symptom can be disguised, misdiagnosis as a drought stress, or you thought the grass went to dormancy, but actually it could be billbug damage. So definitely the drought situation we have this year have made the situation more severe. Another thing is possibly it's a pesticide application. If the pesticides were not applied when the billbug larvae were active in June, or usually the homeowners usually apply with the crop pesticides in mid to late June or July. At that time, the billbugs were not treated or at a good time. So that also can trigger the damage occurring. Plus the drought we mentioned, it just make the situation more severe. And so that's I have. So for insects and also for disease part, the donor spot is coming back. So like Dr. Kerr mentioned that we have experienced drought, and looks like we're going to also receive some rainfall as well. Hopefully we'll have that happen. But in the next in the following time, if you are going to irrigate your lawn, I would say avoid night and afternoon irrigations, as I mentioned previously, and try to do the morning irrigations, and also do a more thorough and infrequent irrigation as well. But of course, if we have good rainfalls, we don't need to do that. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Wu. All right, Dr. Shetlar, can you follow up on the most pessimistic 13 times of the year?
Oops. Let's see. I actually wanted to go back here. Yeah. With all this gloom and doom and everything going on, I do have some good news. And one of those is this is the time of the year. It happens every year, no matter what our weather conditions are like. We get two species of sod webworms that are collectively just called vagabond sod webworms. Both of them are sort of a cream colored, usually with some sort of darker markings on them. To me, the most prominent thing is that they have, while all sod webworms have these forward projecting palps, these have big fluffy palps that project forwards. And they come out every year as adults, and here in the first 2 to 3 weeks of September. They can be easily noticed by the homeowner. If they're out mowing, they get these moths flying up in front of them. They say, "Oh, I've got all these moths out here. What needs to be done about it?" Nothing. Absolutely nothing needs to be done about these. Why? These lay eggs right now. The eggs actually hatch in the fall. The larvae finish about half of their development when the turf is most actively growing in the fall. You're never going to see any damage from this. They then overwinter as almost mature larvae. They feed briefly in the springtime, and then they go down into what we call a pre-pupal dormancy for most of the summer. They hide down in the thatch, and since they're not feeding, they're usually in this silk-lined tunnel. Even if we apply the best insecticides that will kill these caterpillars, or should kill the caterpillars aren't feeding, and they're protected in their silk burrows at the time that we make those applications. They then pupate in August, emerge as adults again, and everybody's mystified as to what the hell happened. I applied all these great insecticides that should have killed caterpillars, and yet I've got these moths out here. And so my statement is, don't worry about it. They're not causing any damage or visible damage to the turf. Now, speaking of gloom and doom, it looks like, all year long I've said, don't worry about them, don't worry about them, don't worry about them. Oh, well, I'm going to flip-flop, worry about them. We are now getting reports from the agronomy folks that are out in the field that they're getting very high numbers of fall armyworms in their pheromone traps. Now, unfortunately, where the research is going on is primarily up around the Fairmont area. We've got some of our field crop entomologists that have pheromone traps there. We have another pheromone trap operator over in the Lyman area. And both of them are saying we're getting hundreds of fall armyworm adults in our pheromone traps for the last 2 weeks to week and a half. And so, again, I wasn't overly worried about it because I was wondering, typically at this time of the year, corn earworms will lay their eggs on the corn predominantly. But if you take a look at the drought situation, our corn crop is drying down right now. And so it would not be a good host for the fall armyworms. What we are getting Some of our sport field managers and golf course superintendents are saying, I'm seeing these egg masses. Now, here's an egg mass on a flag out on a sport field. Here's a really fresh egg mass on a leaf of a tree overhanging green turf. And here's a little egg mass on a little signpost that's out on a golf course. So remember that the sod webworm adults will prefer to lay their eggs on permanent structures overhanging green turf. And that's always been kind of a mystery to me. How does the female at nighttime know that she's laying her eggs over green turf? But however they sense that, however they do it, that's what they do. And so each one of these egg masses, it doesn't take much for you to start counting these and realize that these egg masses can have anywhere from 200 to 500 eggs in an egg mass. Those eggs are going to hatch out in about 7 to 10 days. Then it's going to take about another 20 days for those larvae to get big enough to cause visible damage. So with the egg mass reports that I'm getting right now, what that means is probably by the 3rd week of September, if we're going to see damage from these, that's when it will start to appear. If you can, and the problem that I've got right now is that even those people that applied acelepryn back in May, that acelepryn application usually gives us about 3 months of effective residual to keep caterpillars out of there. And so in September here, we're beginning to get into that end of that acelepryn efficacy window. Now, should you go out and make another acelepryn application? Acelepryn is still a fairly pricey material, but if you've got some very high cost turf that you want to protect, my feeling is you don't need the full rate of acelepryn. You can go with a half rate and get you another month and a half, 2 months of protection with that acelepryn treatment. Otherwise, you can wait wait for about 2 weeks, go out with that detergent flush, apply it and see if you can get some of the little striped caterpillars. What's interesting is that when those caterpillars are young, they may actually be kind of a greenish color rather than the brown and white stripes that you see. But if you flush and you get little striped caterpillars coming up, you probably have some armyworms, and you could do an emergency rescue treatment with the cheapest pyrethroid you can get. And again, in those cases, when you're doing caterpillar control with a pyrethroid, even a half rate, our normal rates are, 1/10 of a pound of active ingredient. You can probably go with 0.05 pounds of active ingredient of one of those pyrethroids to knock down the caterpillars. When it comes to lawns, I don't know. If you do get your customers calling you and say, my lawn disappeared last night, tell them to water, irrigate, because those exposed crowns of the turfgrass in bright sun can be killed if they are hit with sun without water for 2 to 3 days. It can be killed, and then you'll have to reseed. So water is the key. Managed turf usually has enough fertility that it will recover. It just needs water in order to develop new leaves to replace the ones that were eaten down by the caterpillars. So sorry, Ed, there's my gloom and doom again. You asked for no gloom and doom. Well, the sod webworm's not gloom and doom, but fall armyworm, we've got the potential.
Well, as someone once said, off with their heads. Hey, Dave, I do have 2 quick follow-up questions on the presentation there. One, when you say soap flush, can you give a short description if people are doing this, what they need to do with that?
Yeah, there's nothing miraculous about it. We know that, and when I say a soap flush, I really mean a detergent. It does not have to be a soap to do that. The 2 detergents that we've not seen any major problems with phytotoxicity is the Lemon Joy. And a lot of entomologists emphasize the Lemon Joy because they think the lemon has a different kick to it, but I've not seen that. The other one is Dawn Ultra. Both Lemon Joy and Dawn Ultra, if you use about 1 tablespoon per gallon of water, and you'll need about 2 gallons of water to sprinkle over about a 1 square yard or 1 square meter area to bring up any of the surface insects like caterpillars. And the armyworms and cutworms will pop up almost immediately. Even while you're applying it, they may pop up. If you're looking for the sod webworms, apparently that detergent solution needs to get down into their webbing, and they can take maybe 10 to 15 minutes to start coming up to the surface. But for the big caterpillars like the fall armyworm, 1 good tablespoon of either Joy or Dawn in a gallon of water, and you'll need 2 gallons. So I use a 2-gallon bucket, 2 tablespoons of those detergents, mix it up and sprinkle it over an area is what you needed to be doing.
Thank you, Dave. One other question then. With the fall armyworm, just to clarify for people, they will be suppressed with the first frost, correct?
Yes, none of the stages can withstand freezing. And so, and even if we start getting cool temperatures, if we get temperatures down in the 40s, the larval development gets really delayed. They really slow down. They're a warm season critter. And so the hotter the better, but of course that's where we're at right now. And so I think if there is a generation to come, it will start to appear here in mid to late September.
All right. Thank you, folks. The optimism displayed today is outstanding. Some of us wanted to cool down, some of us wanted to rain, some of us wanted to stay warm so we can get seed to germinate. I forecast we're going to be in for a rough fall. Dr. Carr has shared his screen again. If you have questions, I'm sure there's you can send it to. We've got our various Twitter handles. Also, we've got a scholarship outing at Westfield Country Club. The development office, if you are interested, on their website has details about that. We'd appreciate all kinds of support. Thank you, folks. This was an extended one. There's, like I said, nothing really good about it. We will talk to you all next week. Enjoy the weekend.
Go Bucks.